Chapter 36. Will paused in the deep shadow at the base of the wall. This is where he could climb, in the angle between wall and tower. Neither the tower sentry nor the guards on the wall above could see him here. The only possible danger was from the other tower sentry, 30 meters away. But the man was still hunched over the wall, staring fixedly out into the night. He explored the wall's surface with his hands, discarding his gloves and tucking them through his belt to do so. The stonework, which appeared smooth and sleek from a distance, was actually rough and uneven, with plenty of cracks, crevices and protrusions to provide hand and footholds for a climber of Will's experience. In addition, the right angle formed by the wall and the tower would give extra purchase if he needed it. He smiled. He would have been able to climb this wall by the time he was 11 years old. He had a long rope coiled around his shoulders under his cloak, but that was intended to help Alice down, not for him to climb up. With the sentries on duty, he could hardly risk throwing a rope up to catch between the crenellations at the top of the wall. Flexing his fingers, he reached high above his head, found 2 secure handholds in the cold stone, and hauled himself upwards. He moved slowly and smoothly up the wall. At times, he had to move to the left or right of his original starting position as he sought the best purchase. His fingers ached with the strain and the cold, but they were hardened and strengthened by years of practice. As he neared the top of his climb, he heard the sentry's approaching footsteps and paused, hanging by fingers and toes, spread-eagled against the wall like a giant mottled spider. Hanging motionless as a dead weight required a good deal more effort than continuing to climb. The momentum gained while moving seemed to make the task easier. His fingers ached and he pressed his face close against the rough stone of the wall as the footsteps, barely 2 meters away from him, paused as the sentry reached the end of his beat. If the soldier were to choose this moment to break his long-established pattern and peer over the wall, there was no way he could miss seeing the figure below him. Will clung painfully to the stone, barely daring to breathe. Then he heard the sentry's heavy boots stamp once or twice before he turned to walk back and talk to his companion at the midpoint of the wall. As he heard the man walk away, Will began to count. When he reached 5, he went up the last meter of the wall, sliding on his belly through one of the gaps between the crenellations, and lowering himself headfirst to the walkway. This was the most dangerous point of the whole exercise. The far sentry was now facing directly towards him, but he was obscured by the nearer sentry, walking away from him and providing a focus for the other man's attention. Keeping low, Will slid, like a moving shadow, towards a dark alcove provided by a buttress on the tower wall. His count had reached 25, and he heard the lowered voices of the 2 sentries as they stopped and talked in the center of the wall. He pressed himself into the shelter, barely half a meter deep, pulled the cloak around him, and waited, unmoving, his breathing so shallow it was barely perceptible. He knew that absolute stillness was the key to remain undiscovered now. The voices stopped and he heard the measured tramp of boots on stone again, as the sentry began to march back towards him. Will froze, willing himself to become part of the stone and shadow around him as the sentry came closer. He could see the man's face clearly. His beard was scruffy and in need of a trim, and for a moment, perhaps in reaction to the tension, Will thought of Holt and his perpetually shaggy beard and hair, and repressed a ridiculous urge to giggle. The sentry turned again, heading away from Will. The young ranger recalled the words of his training. People rarely notice what they don't expect to see. The sentry certainly hadn't expected to see an intruder standing motionless in the uncertain light, less than 2 meters away. By a stroke of good luck, the stairs heading down to the courtyard were close to hand. This time, Will waited until the two sentries met once more, their gazes turned outward as they talked softly. Silent as a wraith, he slipped out of the shadow to the stairs. He seemed to sink below the level of the walkway as he made his way down. He paused at the base of the stairs. There were no sentries here, but there was always the chance that someone might emerge from one of the doors leading into the keep or the gate tower. He studied the situation for long minutes. The open space leading to the keep tower was well lit by burning torches set into the walls. He would be better served by walking directly without any attempt at concealment. A figure seen walking towards the door would be less likely to raise suspicion than someone who was obviously skulking. He threw back the cowl on his cloak, took a soft, feathered cap from underneath his tunic, straightened it, and placed it on his head. Then, walking confidently and without any attempt at concealment, he walked to the stairs leading to the keep's main door. As he reached the stairs, he slid smartly to his left and merged into the shadows formed by the stairway itself. He discarded the cap and pulled the cowl up over his head once more. Crouched by the stairs, he surveyed the walls opposite to see if anyone had noticed him. But the sentry's attention was focused outwards, not inwards, and there were no casual observers around. Satisfied that he had gone unseen, he moved around the base of the tower to a point midway between two of the flaring torches. At the extreme edge of the light cast by each, the lighting was uncertain and shifting. He took a deep breath, felt to make sure that Malcolm's leather-clad flask was securely and safely stowed in the small of his back, and began to climb once more. As he had expected, the keep tower was built from the same rough stone as the wall, and there were plenty of foot and handholds for him. He climbed steadily. Even with his excellent head for heights, he avoided the temptation to look down. You never knew when vertigo might seize you. The outer wall had been a mere 8 meters high. This tower was over 3 times that height, soaring up to 30 meters above ground level. As he rose higher, the wind picked up, whistling around him, attempting to pluck him from his precarious handholds. 3 out of 4, he repeated to himself, the old dictum he had practiced when climbing since he was a boy. It meant that he never moved a hand or a foot to a new vantage point unless the other 3 were securely positioned. There were several lit windows in his path, and he skirted round them. He was tempted to look in, but he realized this could be a fatal error. If an inhabitant just happened to be looking at the window, the sight of a strange face peering in would be sure to raise the alarm. The wind grew stronger the higher he went, making the freezing air seem even colder. His hands were growing numb, and he was worried by the fact. He hadn't allowed for the effect of the cold when he'd planned this climb, and he needed feeling in his hands to seek out only the most secure cracks and protrusions in the stone. If he couldn't feel them properly, there was always the chance that he'd seize hold of a loose stone and have it give way when he transferred his weight to it. Mentally, he shrugged. There was nothing he could do about it now, and he was already 3/4 of the way up the tower anyway. He glanced out to one side, where the snow-covered land lay far below. Several kilometers away, he could see the dark mass of Grimsdale Wood itself, the tops of the trees dusted with white where snow had collected. If he'd been climbing for the sheer fun of it, he might have stopped to admire the superb vista. He smiled sadly. It had been a long time since he had climbed solely for the fun of it. He glanced up and saw that the narrow ledge around the top of the tower was only a few meters away. He covered the distance and reached up carefully. One never knew what might be found on ledges. Some castle designers liked to set iron spikes in them to discourage climbers. There were no spikes, but he frowned as he touched the freezing surface. Ice, he thought. Rainwater had collected on the ledge and frozen as the temperature dropped. That would make it tricky. Most climbers would have reached eagerly for the ledge, transferring all their weight to their hands as they did so. With slippery ice all over the ledge, that could be fatal. Will kept some weight on his feet as he searched for a clear spot to grip. His toes curled with the effort, and he could feel the beginnings of a cramp in the arch of his left foot. He found a clear spot with his right hand and heaved himself a little higher, his left foot searching for a new foothold. 3 out of 4, he repeated. He moved his left hand to the ledge, sliding it back and forth till he found a spot clear of ice. Then his right foot came up, and he was able to haul himself up to the ledge, turning carefully to sit upon it, his back pressed to the wall behind him. As he leaned back, a little more forcefully than he'd intended, he was aware of something pressing into the small of his back. His heart leapt to his mouth as he remembered the flask of acid. Encumbered as he was by his cloak, if it broke now, there was no way he could get rid of it in time. He leaned a little away from the wall and counted seconds. 10, 15, 20. A full minute went by and there was no burning sensation of acid eating into his flesh. He heaved a sigh of relief. Now, where's Alice? He asked himself. As he had done when climbing the outer wall, he had zigzagged up the wall from his original start point, searching for the best handholds. He looked to his right now and saw that the window he assumed to mark Alice's cell was some 3 meters away. He shuffled sideways along the ledge to it, his legs dangling over the drop. He frowned as he moved towards the window. There was a lot of ice on the narrow ledge, and that was going to make it difficult for him to stand and turn to look in the window. At least, he thought, he'd have the bars to give him a secure handhold. He stopped moving when the window was on his right, the bottom sill a little above the height of his head. He reached up with his right hand, felt along the sill, then found one of the iron bars. If the room was occupied by someone other than Alice, he thought, this could be dangerous. His hand would be in full sight of anyone looking at the window, and as he turned and stood, he would be totally exposed as well. He would have to commit himself before he could check the room's occupant. But, given the icy state of the ledge, he had no alternative. He swiveled to the right on his buttocks, bringing his left foot up onto the ledge. His weight was supported almost fully by his right hand now, and since there had been no outcry from the room, he assumed that whoever was in there wasn't looking at the window. The footing on the ledge was definitely unstable, he decided, as he put more weight on his left leg, slowly turning to his right and straightening the bent knee to lift him higher. His heart leapt as he felt the foot begin to slip sideways in the ice, and he turned more quickly, throwing up his left arm to get a good grip on another bar in the window. He was just in time. His left foot slid out over the edge of the icy ledge, and he found himself hanging by his 2 hands. With a soft groan of effort, he heaved himself upwards. His right foot found the ledge and took some of the strain, not too much as he didn't trust the footing. He blessed the years spent practicing with his bow and the development of his arm and back muscles that had resulted. Now his left foot was back on the ledge and took a little of his weight as well. Slowly, his eyes came level with the bottom window-sill, and he could see into the room, to where Alice sat, slumped at a rough table, her back to the window, her head in her hands.